might be wrong about culture, but you're right about AC/DC. Here we go. The
AC/DC.
best, biggest band.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere aki nei, a vital piece in the puzzle in the race to pin down the Delta outbreak. There are now 21 cases in the community, 11 new ones today. But genome testing shows a close match to a recent returnee from Sydney who tested positive and managed isolation at Auckland's Crowne Plaza. In another twist, 3 people in a room across the hotel hall from that case now also have COVID, suggesting spread inside MIQ. So how exactly did Delta get around managed isolation and out the door? Meanwhile, places of interest blow out to more than 100. We'll have the latest, including an epidemiologist to break it all down, and the school caught in the cluster.
Ahi Marie, RNZ News at 5, ko Sarah Thompson tōko ingoa. Crucial test results have found the Auckland outbreak is likely linked to a traveller who arrived in New Zealand from Sydney on a managed red zone flight. A COVID-19 modeller says it's positive news and could significantly reduce the number of cases that could be in the community undetected. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
There are now 21 community cases of COVID-19, all in Auckland. The source of the outbreak could be the person who arrived on August the 7th, tested positive on day 1 and was moved from the Crowne Plaza to the Jet Park the next day. They became unwell about a week later and went to Middlemore Hospital. Genomic sequencing shows a likely link between that person and the cases in Auckland, but exactly how the virus got into the community is still being investigated. A family adjacent to the Australian arrival at MIQ in the Crowne Plaza tested positive on their day 12 test. Cabinet will meet early tomorrow afternoon to decide on the next steps for alert levels, to be announced at a 3 p.m. media conference.
A COVID-19 modeller says a link connecting the Auckland cluster to the border means the outbreak may be much smaller than originally feared. Genome sequencing has also found the current positive cases are a close match to a recent returnee from Sydney who arrived on a managed red zone flight on August 7th. Professor Sean Hendy says this is a positive development and could scale down the number of people infected at the time the outbreak was first detected to several dozen, well below the estimated 50 to 120.
The best news is that, it's that recent returnee. It means that if it has come from that person, the virus has been out in the community for a far shorter time than we thought yesterday. And that'll bring down our estimates of numbers and just make this cluster easier to contain.
There are fears that visits by a COVID-positive case to 2 Auckland venues could be COVID super-spreader events. Close to 2,000 people may have come into contact with the person in just one night. On Friday the 13th, they visited the nightclub Bar 101 and then Sky City Casino. Close to 2,000 people were there. Dr. Michael Plank, a Canterbury University expert in mathematical modelling, says they have the potential to be super-spreader events.
It's unlikely that all of those would have been infected. That would be extremely unlucky. But certainly, there is the possibility of quite a large number of cases from these. So we really have to wait and see the results of the testing.
As of this morning, more than 360 individual contacts have been identified in the outbreak, although this does exclude contacts from large settings. That number is expected to increase significantly. COVID testing stations in Auckland continue to be under huge pressure. Once again, there have been huge queues and long waits. Yesterday was the busiest since the outbreak in August last year. Almost 16,000 tests were done, about 10,000 of them carried out at general practice and urgent care clinics. There are 10 community testing centres open across the city today. Cabinet has agreed to make the Pfizer vaccine available to 12 to 15-year-olds. This new age group will be eligible to book their first vaccine from the 1st of September. However, if parents are booking in for a vaccine from tomorrow, they can book in their teen to come with them. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the move's been backed by MedSafe and a separate group of experts.
This is not a decision we have taken lightly. Many of us are parents ourselves and take this duty of making decisions about other people's children extremely seriously. But it is safe, and it's the right thing to do.
Jacinda Ardern says there is more than enough vaccine for everyone, including 12 to 15-year-olds. Moving now into sport, the Silver Fern captain, Amelia Ignacio, says she signed with the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic after weighing up a lot of factors. In a major off-season signing, the star shooter is leaving after 6 seasons at the Pulse, where she won back-to-back titles. The Pulse offered her a contract, but Ignacio, who is due to give birth to her second child later this year, says she decided to go to a franchise where she felt the most supported to return to the netball court.
That was the main part of it, and where I could go, where I could feel like everything that I bring was valued and I could bring it to the table and I would be able to be welcomed like that.
Lydia Ko knows she will have to curb the aggressive approach she took at the Tokyo Olympics if she's to succeed at the final major golf event of the year, the British Open at Carnoustie in Scotland. Ko won bronze in Tokyo and followed that up with second place at the recent Scottish Open. But she says the Carnoustie Links course is a very different proposition.
The wind is such a big factor where one day you could be hitting a short mid-iron into a par 5 and then the next day you could be not reaching it in 2. So, yeah, I think I'm just trying to stay on that kind of strategy of, playing aggressively. But at the same time, if I am out of position, making sure that I'm not making careless mistakes.
Ko's recent good form has seen her move up 6th on the world rankings. And that's the news.
People rushing home.
Everyone just felt a bit worried as well. Like everyone just wanted to go home and stay with their families.
COVID cases grow.
In Auckland, I think it's pretty clear we're going to have a longer lockdown than the initial 7 days.
People respond in big numbers to get tested.
The line is snaking down 2 side streets out onto Dominion Road. There are well over 100 people who have turned out to get their tests.
Doing our bit. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Partly cloudy with isolated showers, mainly in the west. Showers more frequent for a time tomorrow evening south of Waikato. For Taranaki to Kapiti, including Taihape, cloudy periods and isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. Showers becoming more frequent tomorrow morning and clearing in the evening. For Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine, with showers spreading north tomorrow, clearing south of Hawke's Bay in the evening. For Buller, Westland and Fiordland, showers with possible thunderstorms in Fiordland today, clearing tomorrow morning, then fine. For Otago, excluding Clutha, scattered showers developing this evening, clearing tomorrow afternoon, then fine. For Clutha and Southland, rain easing to showers in the late evening, clearing tomorrow afternoon and becoming fine. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, rain for a time tomorrow morning. And that concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. The time is now 7 minutes past 5.
Nā mihi, Sarah. Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Could it be the missing piece of the puzzle, a potential link to the COVID outbreak that's throwing the country into hard lockdown? Today, news that the cases could be linked to a recent returnee from New South Wales who went through the Crown Plaza, then on to the Jet Park Quarantine Hotel, and finally Middlemore Hospital. But while that link is pinned down, the locations of interest around Auckland continue to grow. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Since that first case on Tuesday, the news under lockdown has been relentlessly grim. The case numbers ticking up to today past 20. The close contacts likely more than 1,000. The locations of interest now more than 100. They include nightclubs, restaurants, a university, a church and one of the country's largest secondary schools.
I know we're all prepared for cases to get worse before they get better. That is always the pattern in these outbreaks. But today we believe we have uncovered the piece of the puzzle we were looking for.
At last, good news. Critical test results have traced the outbreak back to a potential source. A Kiwi traveller returning from Sydney, currently in Middlemore Hospital. Genomic sequencing shows they have the same strain of the virus as that in the community.
Very, very close, and they've put it to me that they would say roughly 90%.
It's about as close as you can get.
The individual arrived on August the 7th, a Saturday, and went into managed isolation at the Crown Plaza Hotel. On August the 9th, they tested positive for COVID-19 and were shifted to the Jet Park quarantine facility. On the 16th, this Monday, they were shifted to Middlemore Hospital. Based on the timeline, officials believe the virus most likely escaped during those initial days at the Crown Plaza. It appears it also infected 3 others at the facility who were in the room next door.
We are chasing down every possible point at which this individual had contact with others and just seeing if we can analyse every single element of that to see if we can find where this occurred.
That means testing and retesting all staff at both facilities, reviewing camera footage and card use data, establishing exactly how the virus made it out, whether there was a blunder or rule break, will be critical to avoiding a repeat. But regardless, the development is significant.
It means now we can be fairly certain how and when the virus entered the country, and that based on timelines, there are minimal, possibly only 1 or maybe 2 missing links between this returnee and cases in our current outbreak.
And that means it may not have been circulating in the community for long. Sean Hendy is a professor at Auckland University. His initial modelling suggested there could be up to 120 cases already out there. But this changes that.
It'll bring it down to several dozen, I imagine. There quite possibly will be other cases that have arisen before we went into lockdown. But this is quite good news.
That will factor into Cabinet's decision tomorrow as to whether to extend the lockdown restrictions in Auckland and across the country. They will also weigh up the testing levels and results, the spread of close contacts, and whether COVID-19 is turning up in wastewater testing. Even with today's good news then, a note of caution.
It is well known globally that Delta is tougher than previous variants of COVID. So while we have further information to inform our response, we also know it is going to be a tough fight that we all need to play our part in.
That means get a test if you have symptoms, wear a mask in public, and for now, stay home. 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, the Prime Minister will announce the next steps.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined by epidemiologist Professor Philip Hill, who's also on 2 government COVID advisory groups. Kia ora, Professor.
Kia ora, Lisa.
So this link that's been established, it seems, to a recent returnee from Sydney, how significant is that information?
Oh, from what it looks like to me, it's a game changer because it basically suggests that we have a start date for the outbreak, and instead of the possibility that the virus might have been circulating for several weeks or even over a month, like maybe it did last year at this time, it may well have only been circulating in the community for only a matter of days.
Saying that, though, is it your expectation we will still see more cases?
Yes, I think so. Yes, I think it would be unlikely to be going to zero from today. I think we'll still see some cases. Yes, for sure.
The other part of the puzzle is the 3 people staying in a managed isolation room opposite the Sydney returnee. The implication that with them now testing positive for COVID is that there has been internal spread within managed isolation. Either way, we have a serious systems failure here, don't we? And what does that mean?
I think we have to call a spade and label that an infection control failure. And so that will need to be investigated. And that I understand that investigation is underway, for sure.
What are the implications then for that facility with workers and possible knock-on effects?
Well, it's unclear at the moment how significant the infection control failure was. Obviously, it's a more infectious virus, and our MIQ facilities have done amazingly well for the last, must be about 6 months now, to keep the virus away from the community. So there's a lot that's been going right. But each time this happens, it needs to be thoroughly investigated.
The reality seems to be we potentially have two failures, don't we? Because we also have another case which is attached to Air New Zealand, a crew member that health officials do not believe is connected to, well, shall we call it the Devonport Delta cluster. They think this is a separate issue. So potentially we've had two systems failures in a matter of days.
Yeah, that's right. So we're good enough to detect our system failures, which is a good sign, but that is also an infection control failure for sure, yeah.
So you've reviewed the February outbreak in Auckland as part of the government's continual improvement program. So I suppose the vital question is, did we go into this outbreak match fit?
I would certainly hope so.
Your report drew attention to contact tracing, right? And it outlined our capabilities in that area, saying that it looked like we had the potential to track 100 to 200 cases a day. What are your concerns around that, and what do you consider to be sufficient numbers?
Well, I think there's a number of different issues around that, but the key thing is to have adequate capacity when you need it. And for it to be clear to those running the system that they know what their capacity is and that it's likely to meet the needs of the outbreak response. So that those things were unclear, and hopefully they've become more clear as they've responded to those recommendations.
When you say those things are unclear, what do you mean specifically?
Well, I think one of the challenges was that the way in which we respond to an outbreak had changed over the last year or so, in that we have now what we call an early aggressive response, which is really going after the virus using all the capacity, the testing capacity that we have early on to try and knock it on the head early. And so it's a little bit less clear how you would calculate capacity. So there's a debate about whether you calculate it on the number of contacts that you need that you can trace, or the number of cases that have an average number of contacts and things like that. But what was clear to us is that the actual capacity wasn't clear what the capacity was, and we made a judgment that it was probably less than ideal.
The report suggests they would struggle to keep up to 100 to 200 cases a day, and that potential a target for tracking should be around 1,000. Do you still think that is a reasonable expectation?
Well, we have to think about the level, that you'll be in lockdown when you get into lots of cases, and we're already in lockdown straight away with the Delta variant. But, there's no real getting away from it. You look at Sydney and New South Wales with an overall population about the same as New Zealand. They're getting up in towards 1,000 cases a day now. So there's no real escape from the harsh realities of what the virus can do and what capacity you need to be planning to be able to handle.
There seems to be a particular focus on wastewater testing right now, and your report does raise some reservations about wastewater testing. What are the concerns there?
So there's basically two major concerns. One is that the sensitivity of wastewater testing is not absolutely clear. So they've been testing, as I understand, the wastewater coming out of Jet Park and also where there has been an outbreak, and have, they believe that the wastewater testing is quite sensitive, that it picks up virus when it's circulating in the community. But there are some doubts about just how sensitive it is. The other thing is that it can't distinguish basically unviable virus from viable virus. In other words, when you're no longer infectious and you're getting rid of still some viral particles that have parts of the genome still detectable, then it'll still be positive in the wastewater. So, as you resolve an outbreak, you'll still have wastewater positive for some time after the outbreak's actually cleared or finished.
Given what we know now about this outbreak, and there's still information that obviously health officials are still seeking and to map the connections, Auckland is in level 4 lockdown for 7 days, the rest of the country for 3. Would you anticipate that while the rest of the country could move down a level shortly?
I'm certain that the government will be aiming to reduce alert levels in at least some parts of the country as soon as they possibly can. The problem is, the amount of information that's available to them versus you and me is hugely different. So I usually say that I'm very happy to trust them to make a call based on just the amount of information that they have available that we don't.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Professor Philip Hill, who is an epidemiologist. It is 19 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Kia ora rawatu mo te whakarongo mai e haere nei, the college caught in the Delta cluster. Despite the country being in level 4, there are thousands of essential workers around the country still at work. Calls have been growing louder for those in public-facing roles to get priority access to the vaccine. The Prime Minister says it's on the cards and the government's working with key groups. But with Delta in the community, some believe it should have happened already. Louise Tanuth reports.
Alert level 4 means most of us are working from the comfort of home. But for essential workers, it's business as usual. Today, the news they've been waiting for.
But to also bring through essential workers. Our plans to vaccinate these workers starts with those who are customer facing, who interact with the public as part of their essential work. For example, supermarket workers who may not have been eligible because of their age bans to date. We're working with employers of these essential workforces to identify the individuals, and workers you can expect to hear from your employer with extra details.
But Professor of Public Health at Otago University, Nick Wilson, says this decision should have been made months ago.
We did take this approach in terms of Group 1 being border workers and then Group 2 having frontline health workers. But then, rather than focusing on age groups and people with chronic conditions, it would have been good, in my view, to have gone to essential workers at that point.
And Australia is an example of why it's so vital to vaccinate essential workers here.
If we look at the Sydney situation, some of the ongoing spread there is due to essential workers. So it's been one of the contributing factors to its prolonged outbreak, or basically the outbreak going out of control. This is shifting to using vaccination as a more immediate outbreak control measure, especially in Auckland.
Executive Director of the Taxi Federation, John Hart, has been advocating for drivers since COVID reached our shores. He says they're constantly at risk.
Especially those taking people to and from airports, and drivers taking people to and from hospitals and healthcare centres. And so that's been really worrying for some of them. And in fact, there are some who just have not returned to work. They've just stayed home. They've given up.
He doesn't understand why they weren't prioritised from the beginning.
There would not have been any great inconvenience for anyone to have vaccinated taxi drivers who are vulnerable. It's not as if there are millions of them. There are relatively small numbers, and they could very easily have been put onto a priority list and vaccinated. So, in our opinion, it's unreasonable.
Ben Peterson is the national retail organiser at First Union. He says the fact retail and supermarket workers haven't been prioritised until now sends a poor message about how they're valued.
Last lockdown, we're all very aware about how essential supermarket workers were, and then we all sort of rallied around and said, gee whiz, aren't you guys great, fantastic, have a round of applause. And then we went back to level 1 and promptly forgot about supermarket workers and didn't change the way they're paid or didn't change the respect that they have as an industry.
And retailers need to reassess what's really essential work instead of unnecessarily putting them at risk.
Forcing a lot of people who should be at home to come in and be running, doing online orders for stuff like decorative cushions and salt lamps and stuff that isn't within the what was an essential product. So we're really concerned about some of the nodes of transmission that could be created by bringing people into stores unnecessarily.
Checkpoint asked Countdown, Foodstuffs and NZ Bus how many of their essential workers are vaccinated, but they didn't have the information. Foodstuffs says they've been given the go-ahead to set up vaccination centres for their teams and are hoping to get started as soon as possible.
Ho mai o whakaaro, we'd love your feedback. Nō reira anei nā kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. You were hearing there from Louise about essential workers. So police, supermarket workers, supply chain, taxi drivers, people who are face-to-face with the public. Are you one of those workers? Have you managed to get a vaccine? And should it be moving along a bit faster for people in those jobs? Pātui mai, you can text me 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoints@rnz.co.nz. 5 members of the same family who are connected to Avondale College are among the new COVID cases confirmed today. There's now officially 21 community infections. It comes after a teacher at the secondary school caught the Delta variant. So now about 2,800 students and staff are in isolation. Avondale College Principal Lindy Watkinson explains what happens now.
All of our school staff and students will be considered as close contacts, and so we're in isolation for 14 days.
And have they explained to you why the entire school and all the staff are considered to be close contacts?
I don't think that's. I can't say on that one. It's not for me to say why they've made that decision. That would have to go to public health. But certainly, we're a big, busy secondary school, and so in a community such as ours, we're treating all students and all staff as close contacts.
Did the teacher work in multiple classrooms or across different levels?
And I mean, I think obviously our thoughts and best wishes are with the teacher and with their family, and they're very much in our thoughts, and as a community we send them our best wishes. They obviously work at our school. They were in school a number of days over the last week, and Auckland Regional Public Health are working through the exact details of where they were and where they were working, and we're of course providing public health with all of the information that they're requesting of us.
Yeah, I suppose what I'm just trying to get a feel for is whether the teacher will have had contact with multiple different classrooms and therefore different children who may have then gone on to mix with other children in other classroom settings. What can you tell us about that?
I think I wouldn't want to make a definitive statement on that. I think that they're obviously working, that the teacher is working with public health to make sure that they've got the information they need, and their decision at the moment is that we're all close contacts.
So she was a regular full-time teacher, is she?
Oh, look, I'm not going to talk in specifics around the staff member or any of our students. I'm pretty concerned to preserve people's collective privacy.
Okay, so have you had an opportunity to talk to the teacher, and how are they doing?
Oh, again, I think that's for us to keep to ourselves. I don't want to in any way expose people's privacy.
So I understand you had some students who were off campus at a choir event. What can you tell us about that?
Oh, all of our students were, of course, off campus because we were in lockdown. So there was nobody at the school site once the announcement was made on Tuesday evening. We did have one group who were travelling out of Auckland, and they've all now returned safely and with their families.
So where were they, Lindy?
They were in Rotorua. They returned completely in line with public health guidelines, and as I say, they were reunited with their families safely.
Yes, I understand. So they came back in time for the lockdown, but how many people were away, and who were they mixing with and where?
I think if you've got particular questions around that, they probably needs to go to public health. At the moment, that group are just being treated as any other member of our school community.
Right. So as I understand it, they were at a choir event in Rotorua with other schools and organisations. Is that the case, Lindy?
Yeah, as I say, I think if you've got particular questions around that and where our students may have been, because as I said, we're a very big, busy school, and our students have been part of many events locally and a little bit further afield in recent days. If there are particular concerns about anyone that our students may have been in contact with, then people should contact Auckland Regional Public Health. Of course, our immediate concern is to make sure that our students and our staff, who are those close contacts, are safe and well.
So how is school itself operating over the next couple of weeks then, while everyone has to isolate?
I mean, at the moment, our focus is just looking after each other and making sure that the students and the teachers are well supported, and that really important messaging is getting out to the community. And of course, many of our staff also have children who they're looking after, and people are going to very careful steps to make sure that they follow the public health advice and get tested and go to the appropriate places. I'm sure that next week we'll start to think about distance learning, and we're really well positioned to switch to distance learning next week and look after the students, and the Ministry of Education will provide support with that. It's a busy, important time of the school year for students, and so when the time is right and we know that people are healthy and safe, then we'll focus back on that learning and make sure that our students are positioned for the success that they're working towards.
And Lindy, the physical school, what advice have you had around cleaning, etc.?
Again, we'll work closely with the Ministry of Education and Public Health around that. As we're all at level 4 at the moment, there's nobody on our school site at all. But once we're able to have access and do the cleaning and get the site ready for students when the moment is right, we'll do that following all of their guidelines.
Cases that are associated with the college, have you been in contact with that family?
We're of course watching all of the things that are evolving in the space around the cases, and working closely with the ministry and closely with public health and making contact with people as appropriate.
I know this is a really difficult situation that you and the school finds itself in. I'm just wondering, is there anything that you wish you had done differently?
Oh, I think you might have to ask me that in a couple of weeks' time. No, I don't think I'm in a position to ask that right now. I'm sure I'll reflect on this and think of all sorts of things.
And that is the Avondale College Principal, Lindy Watkinson there. Now, the Avondale College exposure has left other Auckland schools racing to have their students tested. Thousands of Auckland school students have been mingling with Avondale College students over the weekend. Joining me now is the headmaster of Auckland Grammar, Tim O'Connor. Hi, Tim. It's a 6 degrees of separation kind of situation. So would your students have crossed paths with Avondale College students in recent days?
Yeah, look, sure, Auckland's a small place, contrary to what many people believe, and certainly is in a secondary school environment. Lisa, can I just say, before I say anything else, we're certainly thinking of Avondale College, their staff and students, and offer them our full support. Anything that we can do to help, of course, we would. Look, our student staff we've got a range of connections with Avondale. We have a great working relationship with them, and of course, some of our teachers have partners who are teachers at Avondale. We share a catering staff member with one of our providers, and over the weekend, some of our students competed against Avondale groups, starting with what you just talked about, the Cadenza Big Sing Festival in Rotorua. There were 12 choirs there. 7 other schools from Auckland and 1 from Tauranga, a couple from Hamilton, 1 from Rotorua. And we also competed against Avondale at the Auckland Jazz Festival on Sunday, where there were 50 bands competing. So, yeah, lots of connections with Avondale. And our communications to the groups who have had direct connection have been to parents, the organisers of those groups, the big band and the choir, talk to the parents and say, look, if you're really concerned, go and be cautious, go and get tested, but otherwise follow Ministry of Health guidelines. And the connections with staff, of course, have been exactly the same. Contact the Ministry of Health helpline, follow their guidelines, be cautious, look after each other.
Given that there have been a couple of big school-focused events, have you heard anything from the Ministry of Education or Ministry of Health in terms of specific advice to the school?
No, none. No, nothing at all in particular. We've just tried to be proactive, follow what we're hearing on via the media announcements, and act with good sense to be socially responsible.
Can we move on today? There was an announcement. The government has green-lit the vaccination, the Pfizer vaccine, for 12 years and up. So obviously a lot of school kids now eligible for this. I mean, what's your response to that move?
I think it's a great thing, and we should be moving through. We know that this Delta variant is affecting people of all ages, so the sooner we can vaccinate the entire population, the better, and I think we should do so with some real haste. We're working immediately to try and get all of our staff vaccinated. And so we're working with a provider to see if we can get them to come on campus to be able to do that for staff. And in particular, once we've talked to our parents at borders, to get our borders vaccinated, because of course they live in a communal environment. So we'd like to give them an extra layer of safety as soon as we can as well.
So given that you're hoping to get on-site vaccination for at least some of the school community there, would that be for you the most efficient way to do the rest of the students?
I think so, but that'd have to be a conversation, a governance discussion in the first instance. I guess we've seen the real variation of responses, haven't we, to this? But I personally think and professionally think that the sooner the student population and the staff population are vaccinated, the sooner we can get on with teaching on campus with regularity, which will advantage every student in this country.
Yeah, so as soon as you bring that up, at the moment, everybody's learning from home. And I know it's not your first rodeo, you've been in this situation before, but how is it going?
Look, because we've had multiple experiences with this now. On Tuesday night, we'll probably like others, we predicted as soon as we heard an announcement was being made at 6. We had an option that we were expecting 800 people on campus to make subject selections for next year. We sent out a text message to parents at 5 saying that's postponed, waiting for the 6 p.m. announcement, prepared comms that we were going to go to level 4, and informed all parents by just after 7 that we were moving into online lessons on Wednesday morning. And every student was online. Well, every student had material online by 8:30 the following morning. We had 1,900 students online by 9, and those who weren't online yesterday and submitting work were contacted this morning by our year level deans, their parents and the boys, to say, where are you? And you need to get on with it, and you need to submit the work.
So have you had assistance from the Ministry of Education in doing that and sorting those things out, or do you just make these decisions by yourself and get on with it?
They just make the decisions and get on with it. Like we had comms out to parents by just after 7 on Tuesday night. We weren't receiving comms from the Ministry of Education until just before 8. So we're not going to wait for the ministry to act. They're good at policy, they're not great at practice.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Tim O'Connor, who's the Auckland Grammar Headmaster. Kia ora e te iwi e haere ake nei I our checkpoint. The long wait for a COVID swab. Thousands spend their day lined up for tests. Fears super spreader events have already happened, with rammed nightclubs on the list of locations of interest. And one of the hundreds of people who escaped Afghanistan on a US cargo flight shares his story. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Don't forget, you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, Facebook us at Checkpoint, or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Interested in your thoughts on expanding the vaccination rollout to include young people 12 years and up. Let us know your thoughts. It is time for the headlines now with Sarah.
Kia ora, Lisa. RNZ News headlines, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. Test results show the Auckland outbreak is probably linked to a returnee who arrived from Sydney on a managed red zone flight on August 7th. COVID-19 modeller Professor Sean Hendy says this means the outbreak may be much smaller than originally feared. He says it could scale down the number of people infected at the time the outbreak was first detected to several dozen, well below the estimated 50 to 120. Epidemiologist Professor Philip Hill has told Checkpoint that genome testing linking the outbreak to the returnee from Sydney is a game changer. Professor Hill says the transmission of COVID within the Crown Plaza Hotel and the Air New Zealand cabin crew member are both infection control failure, but he says the fact these failures were picked up is a good sign. Modeller Dr Michael Plank of Canterbury University says the visits by a COVID-positive case to 2 Auckland venues last Friday could be super spreader events. Close to 2,000 people who were at the nightclub Bar 101 and Sky City Casino may have come into contact with the person. As of this morning, more than 360 individual contacts have been identified in the outbreak, but that number is expected to increase significantly. Cabinet's agreed to make the Pfizer vaccine available to 12 to 15-year-olds from the 1st of September. However, if parents are booking in for a vaccine, from tomorrow they can book their teen to come with them. COVID testing stations in Auckland continue to be under huge pressure, with huge queues and long waits. Yesterday, almost 16,000 tests were done, around 10,000 of them carried out at general practice and urgent care clinics. There are 10 community testing centres open across the city today. And finally, a defence force is preparing to be deployed in Afghanistan for up to a month. A Hercules aircraft left Auckland this morning to help with evacuation efforts following the Taliban's takeover. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says the defence force asked Cabinet to deploy up to 80 personnel for the operation. Those are your headlines. Our next news and sport update at 6.
No mai hoki mai, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei, ko taku hoa inai ko Nona Peltier, who's in our Auckland newsroom with the business news. Nona, let's start with Auckland Airport, right? It has made its first ever full year operating loss. What's it saying about the result and how things are looking to the future?
Hello, yes. Well, Auckland Airport is saying the past year has been like no other in the airport's history. It said that for the year, they had the lowest number of international arrivals and departures since 1972. So that gives you an indication of where they ended up for the year. So their operating loss was, close to $42 million. And that reflects really a 50% drop in its revenue. Now, importantly, their net profit for the June year was up. It was at $464 million compared with last year's $139 million. And that's because the value of its property, it was increased by $528 million. Now, of course, that's not a realized gain, but nevertheless, it did show up on the bottom line.
Nona, and you're saying it's a seller's market for businesses. So what's in high demand?
Well, small and medium businesses, there aren't enough to go around for the appetite for them. There's been a 14% drop in new business listings, but the average price for these, where they are available, has increased 16% to $733,000. And that's for small and medium-sized businesses, excluding the hospitality sector. But even for that sector, the price is up 9% to $202,000. So very healthy market out there. The company that's pulled together this information is a company called ABC Business Sales. And they say that their data also shows that private business ownership continues to be offering a much higher yield than that offered by commercial property.
So, Nona, how's the market been looking today?
It's been a really interesting day on the market. So you would expect with COVID that things might be a bit downbeat, but you would be wrong. It's the biggest one-day gain since early January. And the top 50 index is at a 6-month high. So 40 of the 50 stocks in the index were up. The main influencers there were Main Freight, which isn't surprising because of couriers in demand at the moment. A2 Milk, Chorus, Fisher & Paykel Healthcare. The only top 10 stock that didn't post a gain was Auckland Airport. But, it only dropped 0.4%. And that's only a 3-cent drop, so pretty strong for them anyway. The index finished up, up nearly 2%, 239 points up to 12,957. That's almost 13,000 again. And Chorus, of course, as I mentioned before, it was up more than 12%. And that follows a Commerce Commission decision that valued its fibre network very close to what Chorus was valuing it. So that really drove up the value there. And just looking at the New Zealand dollar, well, it's been a bit weak, and that's not surprising. We are at 68.5 US cents, 95.2 Australian, and 50.2 pence.
Thanks, Nona. That's Nona Peltier with our business news. People have been waiting for 7 or 8 hours in Auckland for a COVID-19 test. The number of locations of interest has ballooned to more than 100, meaning people are coming out from all corners to get a test. Katie Doyle reports.
The queue for the Balmoral testing station in Tamaki Makaurau grew and grew and grew, stretching for more than a kilometre. People parked up for a long day of waiting for the all-important swab. Hundreds of cars now snaking down the road through side streets, waiting.
Not long to go now, another 2 more hours and we should be there for testing.
But once you get in the queue, you might as well just stay in it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of a wait, but worth it.
People had come prepared.
We're on Netflix, got food and snacks.
I've got my book and I've got my phone. Not that I've been using my phone, of course.
Oh, we've been listening to a bit of music, tried to listen to a podcast as well. Yeah, we gave up on that one pretty fast.
But with nature calling, some were forced to abandon their post.
There's been quite a few people that have dropped out of the queue, and I would guess that that's probably because of toilet breaks. There's nowhere to go.
We've been through worse. Yeah, we've been through worse, so we can hold in the number 2s and everything, so we'll be right.
In Wellington, people in line at the Taranaki Street testing station were nervous about the growing Auckland cluster.
A bit anxious, honestly, but I feel like what the government's done going into level 4 as soon as and as hard as possible is probably the best thing.
I'm just cautious, I think. There's no community cases outside Auckland, so just playing it safe really, doing my bit.
A little bit worried, but I've got faith in what the government and stuff want to do.
For those who have been pinged for being at a location of interest, it's straight for a test and then another wait. Those who live with those people also have to stay at home.
They are required to isolate as well, and this means they can't go out for any purpose, or if they're an essential worker, they need to isolate until that person who's been at a location of interest has returned a negative test after day 5.
With everyone on high alert and the list of locations of interest growing, it seems as though the long testing lines are here to stay too.
OK, well, how is it looking out there now? Our reporter Nick Trubridge joins us. Nick, where are you?
Hi, Lisa. I'm at the testing station in Henderson. I'm just driving down Catherine Street in Henderson, which is where it is. And just to give you an idea of those queues, I've just spoken to the guy who's at the front of it, shouted out my window. He's been here 9.5 hours. 9.5 hours. So to put that into perspective, he got here about 8 o'clock this morning. It's now 5:45, 6. He's been here all day. He wasn't that happy, safe to say.
Nick, I'm sorry to be so brutal, but I mean, what happens if you want to go for a wee or whatever? Are there any facilities around there?
Look, I can't see any. There are a couple of grass berms if you're really desperate, but maybe not. I don't know. You might get arrested. Just to sort of give you more of a picture, Lisa, I've just turned onto Railside Avenue in Henderson. The line is it really is as far as the eye can see. It really is. I'm told it goes all the way to Bruce McLaren Road, which is about 3 k's away from the testing centre itself.
Nick, we should say you're on hands-free, so you're driving perfectly legally and carefully, and you'll pull over if you need to have a chat to us. Have you obviously you had a shout out to the guy in the front of the queue. Any chance to talk to anyone else there about kind of what's bringing them?
Let me see if I can pull over up here and just shout out to this guy who's got his window open. 2 seconds.
Sure, we'll hang fire while you do that, Nick. So very long queue for testing.
How long have you been waiting? 6 hours? 6 hours. 2 to 3 hours. So this is towards the end of the queue. So that gives you an idea,
right,
Lisa?
Yeah.
It does sort of. I will say, sort of putting your journalist hat on for a moment. It does raise questions about, I guess, the efficiency of the system. Are there enough testing stations? How many people wait here for a few hours and think, bugger this, I'm going to go home, I've had enough of this, even though they're symptomatic?
So, Nick, can you tell us how long that one is open for? Do you know?
Yeah, so this one's open till 8 p.m, I believe, and it actually looks like they may be starting to turn people away. So people who have been waiting hours, possibly being told to go home, if unless my eyes are deceiving me. But it looks like they've put an end to. They've put an end to the line at the end of Railside Ave. So that's about, that would be about halfway down the line as it stood before they closed it. It opens again at 8 tomorrow, I believe. Check Health Point, but I believe it's 8 tomorrow. So, look, some people have been waiting for hours and now they've been told to go home. Try again.
Nick, thanks for that. That is Nick Trowbridge, who's out at a testing station. And as he said, you can check all the opening times online. But the guy at the front of the queue, Nick, was saying 9.5 hours. Well, that's some stamina for you. It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And Muriaki ina pita pita kōrero. After the news at 6, travellers in Queenstown are given more time to get home, but the race is still on. There are fears 2 Auckland events could be COVID super spreaders, with close to 2,000 people deemed close contacts from just one night. On Friday the 13th, a now positive case took late night trips to a nightclub and casino, both in central Auckland. A COVID modeller says these types of events are of particular concern. Jordan Bond reports.
A nightclub may be the most fertile ground for COVID to spread. It happened in South Korea. A young man unknowingly infected at the time was the origin case of a chain that spread to more than 100 people. That was in May last year with the original COVID strain. The Delta variant is much more contagious than that. One of New Zealand's first 10 cases visited a nightclub, Bar 101 in central Auckland, last Friday night for nearly 2 hours.
Well, this shows that there is quite a high risk of super spreading event.
That's Dr. Michael Planck, a Canterbury University expert in mathematical modelling of complex biological systems. On the same night as that, a case went to the Sky City Casino in Auckland between 1:15 and 3 a.m. Sky City has determined 240 staff working that night are close contacts, and there were around 1,000 patrons on the gaming floor also deemed close contacts. 1,250 close contacts and pushing 2,000 between the nightclub and the casino.
It's unlikely that all of those would have been infected. That would be extremely unlucky. But certainly, there is the possibility of quite a large number of cases from these. So we really have to wait and see the results of the testing.
The most important thing, Dr. Planck says, is that all close contacts completely isolate and get tested. Sky City says it's been working quickly to contact staff, advising them to isolate and get tested. Joe Carolyn from Unite Union, which represents some of the casino workers at Sky City, says the company's been in good communication and worked well with them, and now it's a waiting at home game.
We've obviously learned from the Australian experience how quickly this thing can move. Everybody's waiting to find out today, how big the infections will be. But you can see already the numbers that we're talking about is a lot.
John Lawrenson owns Bar 101, the visited nightclub, and only found out it was a location of interest through the media. He says 900 people went through the club that night, but it looks to be only 400 or so at the same time as the positive case, and split between 2 floors.
I mean, that is a large number of individuals in an enclosed space over maybe 90 minutes to 2 hours. Relatively tight and enclosed space when there's that number of people in there. So, you'd have to think that there's some risk of transmission.
Another case is a teacher at Avondale College, which has nearly 3,000 students and then more staff on top of that. The staff member was considered infectious on Thursday and Friday last week. All staff and students are considered close contacts. On Monday and Tuesday this week, a group from Avondale College travelled to Rotorua for a choir event, the Big Sing Cadenza. The Chief Executive of the New Zealand Choral Federation, Christine Argyle, says all schools who were there are waiting to see what happens with Avondale. And today, 5 of the reported cases are linked to Avondale College.
Really thinking of all the choirs and singers that were at Cadenza, and really appreciate the anxiety that some of them will be feeling. But we hope that they are staying positive, not COVID positive, of course.
It's now a waiting game to see how far this cluster has spread.
Let's get to some of your feedback on this. Pete, has got in touch to say, what we have is a failure of MIQ in the COVID ward at Middlemore and a case with Air NZ. So when are we going to get daily saliva testing for staff at MIQ, hospital and aircrew? The Darwin case, day 17 test, thanks, says Pete. On the issue of vaccinating essential workers, Mike says, a good, though belated decision. The rhetoric about the team of 5 million rings hollow. David H. reckons all essential workers, especially hospital staff, should have been first to be vaccinated, along with bus and taxi drivers. They're more at risk than aged people, he says. And Linda, if police and supermarket workers haven't been vaccinated, that's the fault of their unions. They're meant to take care of the welfare of their members, says Linda. Keep your feedback coming, 2101 on the text. An Afghan has told of his miraculous escape from Kabul this week, crammed aboard a US cargo plane. Images from the plane have gone viral of hundreds of people refusing to get off in the hopes of being evacuated. One of them spoke to World Watch's Max Toll about those fraught few hours.
The American Air Force, at the first place, they stopped everyone and they told us that you cannot enter into the plane. I mean, people were so scared and they were so desperate, so they just entered in the plane.
Sunday was the longest day of Ramin Rahman's life. For weeks, the photojournalist had been trying to escape Afghanistan, willing to pay exorbitant sums for a black market visa, amid rumours the Taliban were nearing Kabul. When the militants arrived, he, like thousands of others, fled to the city's airport. There, he saw frightening scenes.
I saw a lot of people. People were really scared and they were worried that what's going to happen to them. I thought these are the moments that, like, I die and this is the last night I am alive. Taliban were like getting close to us and they were coming and we were hearing like heavy gunfires and shots there.
So when US troops started rounding up Americans to board flights, he, like hundreds of others, rushed past soldiers onto a massive cargo plane. An image of more than 600 Afghans crammed into the plane has since gone viral. People clutching their remaining possessions, women breastfeeding children.
I was in the middle of the people. It was another total disaster for us. There was no water. There was really hot weather. A lot of people were in that plane. Kids were crying. Women were crying. I couldn't breathe there almost it was so hard to breathe there. We were hearing gunfires outside.
When it started to take off, I assume there was much joy on the plane?
Oh my God, you can't believe it. The people were so happy that they felt alive again because everyone was feeling dead.
Ramin Rahman is one of the lucky ones. He and the others aboard are now in a US military camp in Doha. He's hopeful of moving to Germany soon. US officials say they've so far managed to evacuate roughly 5,000 people from Afghanistan, but the situation at Kabul airport remains volatile. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, says violence could erupt there at any moment.
Currently, the security situation at the airport is stable. However, there are threats, and we're closely monitoring those. At any moment, they could happen. If we identify them, we will take immediate military action without hesitation, in accordance with our rules of engagement. And the Taliban and every other organization in that country knows it.
As for those the US are unable to help across the city of Kabul and across Afghanistan, Ramin is fearful for them. The Taliban have spoken publicly and assured people that their rule won't be as heavy-handed as it was decades ago, but I assume you still have fears for your people?
I don't believe what they are saying, honestly, because if you remember the first time they have come to Afghanistan, they were saying the same things. They were so friendly with people. Once they have took all over the country, they started their own rules. They started their own laws.
High-ranking Taliban officials are still reportedly piecing together a government negotiating the future of Afghanistan.
Well, in news just to hand, the police say that they've made a small number of arrests today to help ensure community safety and limit any potential further spread of COVID-19. Officers in Christchurch arrested 3 people this afternoon for being involved in anti-lockdown protests. A group of about 10 people apparently gathered at the Bridge of Remembrance on Cashel Street at about 1 o'clock. Police say they tried to encourage them to move on and comply with the Alert Level 4 restrictions. However, 3 were taken into custody when they refused to do so. 2 men, 46 and 50 years old, and a woman who's 56 has been charged with failing to comply with the direction or prohibition restriction. Now, there was another incident also in the far north, and this relates to the Kaitaia Pack and Save. The police say that there was 2 members of the public refusing to comply with the requirement to wear a face covering. Now, remember, if you go into the supermarket or the dairy, you do have to wear a face covering now from today. 2 people were acting in a disorderly manner, the police say, towards supermarket staff and other members of the public, refusing to wear face coverings. As a consequence, a 44-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman were arrested for disorderly behaviour and breaching the Public Health Response Act. And the woman was apparently acting reportedly in a threatening manner. Police say it's pretty disappointing to see these issues, but generally speaking, there is a high compliance. They're saying at the moment they're trying to take an education-first approach, but over the last couple of days, they've seen that enforcement action will be necessary. Now, a few of you getting in touch about the push to get all essential workers vaccinated. This is people like bus drivers, taxi operators, the people who are serving you when you go to the grocery store. This person says, essential workers, can you please include volunteer firefighters of any age in the essential workers for vaccines, please? Another person reckons funeral directors should also be at the front of the queue because they're going into hospital wards, rest homes, etc., and running funerals where there are large gatherings. On the issue of Avondale College, now, there was a choir at Avondale College and they travelled to, a competition in Rotorua on Tuesday. And this person says they were at the Big Sing. And I'm a teacher in Rotorua. My colleague is the mother of one of the Rotorua Boys High Choir. Potentially, they could have been exposed to the Delta virus if it is as contagious as stated. I think I'd call Healthline if I were you and get their advice, and also look at the locations of interest to see whether any of those are stated in terms of that particular event. And I know there were other high school events over the weekend.
Ahiahi Marie, RNZ News at 6, ko Sarah Thompson tōku ingoa. Crucial test results linking the Auckland COVID cases to the border are being described as a game changer for the outbreak that has plunged the country into lockdown. Genome sequencing has found a close match to a recent returnee from Sydney who arrived on a managed red zone flight on August 7th. Public health expert Professor Philip Hill has told Checkpoint it means there is a clear start date.
And instead of the possibility that the virus might have been circulating for several weeks or even over a month, like maybe it did last year at this time, it may well have only been circulating in the community for only a matter of days.
But Professor Hill says there will still be more cases. The number of infected people has more than doubled over the last 24 hours, from 10 to 21. 2 people in the community with COVID-19 were taken to hospital overnight. The Ministry of Health says 2 people were taken to North Shore Hospital overnight on Wednesday, and both are in a stable condition. 2 Auckland supermarkets were visited by COVID-19 cases not long after it was announced the country was going into Alert Level 4. New World Mount Roskill and New World Green Bay have been added to the Ministry of Health's lists of locations of interest this afternoon. After the first positive case was announced on Tuesday afternoon, people rushed to supermarkets around the country to stock up in anticipation of a potential lockdown. Stores remained busy into the evening. The Mount Roskill store was visited for about 20 minutes from 7 o'clock on Tuesday evening. The Green Bay store was visited for an hour from 7 o'clock. Stranded travellers have been given a temporary reprieve by the extension of the travel window. It was estimated that hundreds of people could be stranded in Queenstown if the window shut at midnight tonight. This afternoon, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced that Cabinet had agreed to extend the length of time by 24 hours until midnight tomorrow.
We will check in with them again because we have heard that there is high demand there. The issue, as you'll know, for Queenstown is because of the particular runway and airport situation there. There are certain pilots that have the ability to come in and out of that airport, and that does limit the number of flights they're able to bring in.
Air New Zealand will put on extra flights from Queenstown to Auckland and Wellington, and the Inter-Islander will also have extra sailings. New Zealand has broken its record for internet use, with most people at home under level 4 lockdown. More than 26 petabytes of data were transported across Chorus network yesterday, the equivalent of 1,000 years of a single high-definition Netflix stream. Internet use yesterday was 27% higher than the first day of level 4 lockdown last year. A spokesperson for Chorus, Kurt Rogers, says despite the heavy load on the network, there's plenty of capacity.
Last night at about 9 o'clock, we peaked at 3.6 terabits per second, and we can handle up to 4.5. So we know that there's plenty of headroom to see us through the rest of the lockdown.
Kurt Rogers says the increased use of apps and streaming since last year explains why data usage is up. The Prime Minister has warned it will be tough getting the people most in danger out of Afghanistan. A Hercules aircraft has left for the Middle East to help with evacuations following the Taliban's takeover. The military contingent flew out of Auckland this morning and could be deployed for up to a month. Jacinda Ardern says some of those bound for New Zealand may have to leave via partner countries such as Australia and vice versa.
When we met this morning with officials, we were advised, though, that the situation on the ground is incredibly difficult. People are struggling to get to Kabul airport. We need to be prepared for how hard this mission will be and how difficult it will be to evacuate those who we are seeking to help.
Jacinda Ardern says her thoughts are with defence personnel and she knows they will do what they can. Auckland Mayor Phil Goff has thanked the outgoing Ports of Auckland Board Chair Bill Osborne for his contribution to the port and city. Mr Osborne will stand down in September. The message from Mr Goff stands in sharp contrast to a letter he sent to Mr Osborne in March. The Mayor said then that the Ports of Auckland had not shown a, quote, willingness to be accountable for its performance. In recent years, the port had been linked to 3 deaths and a number of worksite injuries. In May this year, Tony Gibson announced his resignation as the port's chief executive. Moving now into sport, an independent inquiry into Cycling New Zealand's high-performance program will take place following the death of New Zealand representative cyclist Olivia Podmore. The joint inquiry, launched by Cycling New Zealand and High Performance Sport New Zealand, will focus on the adequacy of the changes made after a 2018 review into the sport. In a statement, High Performance Sport New Zealand Chief Executive Raylene Castle said Podmore's death had raised serious questions about athlete well-being in the wake of the Tokyo Olympics that must be acted upon. An independent inquirer is yet to be appointed, with further details of the inquiry to be confirmed next week. Days of torrential rain, thunderstorms and flooding have hampered the New Zealand Paralympic track and field athletes' pre-games training camp in Japan. 7 of the 8 members of the athletic squads have been based in Saga since Sunday, but training sessions have been affected by the city receiving more than half their annual average rainfall in less than a week. Javelin thrower Holly Robinson says the early arrival in Japan was supposed to help athletes adjust to local conditions.
One day we could not train at all because everyone had stay-at-home orders. You couldn't leave the hotel or anywhere because of the flooding. So it is interesting, but I think my experiences of the past helps me deal with situations that are challenging and are different.
The Wheel Blacks, swimmers and cyclists left for Tokyo today for the Paralympic Games, which start on August the 24th. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, our correspondent Taba Butagera is on the line from Uganda. Michelle Grant debuts as our latest regular guest. She's going to make sense of structural engineering, or why big buildings don't fall down most of the time. And Emily Kendall presents the science of Ghostbusters. Not the supernatural stuff, but those proton beams the heroes fire out of their backpacks to bust them. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Ramere Friday. Northland to Taumaranui, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Partly cloudy with isolated showers, mainly in the west. Showers more frequent for a time tomorrow evening south of Waikato. For Taranaki to Kapiti, including Taihape, cloudy periods and isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. Showers becoming more frequent tomorrow morning, clearing in the evening. For Gisborne to Wairarapa and Wellington, also Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine. Showers spreading north tomorrow, clearing south of Hawke's Bay in the evening. For Buller, Westland and Fiordland, showers with possible thunderstorms in Fiordland today, clearing tomorrow morning and then fine. For Otago, excluding Clutha, scattered showers developing this evening, clearing tomorrow afternoon, then fine. For Clutha and Southland, rain easing to showers in the late evening, clearing tomorrow afternoon and becoming fine. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and rain for a time tomorrow morning. That concludes the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Rāmere Friday. The time is now 8 minutes past 6.
Kia ora rā, e hoa no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. There are now 21 community cases of COVID-19, but health authorities are heartened by a possible link to the border. They believe a recent returnee from New South Wales has sparked the outbreak. That person was taken to the Crown Plaza in Auckland for MIQ. After testing positive, they went to Jet Park and since then have been taken to Middlemore Hospital. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says genomic sequencing shows the latest cases are similar to the New South Wales case.
This is a significant development. It means now we can be fairly certain how and when the virus entered the country, and that based on timelines, there are minimal, possibly only one or maybe two missing links between this returnee and cases in our current outbreak.
At the same time, the locations of interest continue to balloon to well over 100. In the last hour or so, the Ministry of Health has added even more to that list. Some of the locations date back to the 1st of August. Now, among them is the Countdown in Botany Downs on Wednesday, 11th of August, West City in Henderson on Friday, the 13th of August, and the KFC in Botany Downs on Tuesday, 17th of August, and the Blockhouse Bay Christian Kindergarten on Wednesday, the 4th of August. The full list is on the Ministry of Health website. Meanwhile, travellers stranded in Queenstown have been given a temporary reprieve before the travel window is poised to slam shut. Hundreds of people are in town trying to get back, but there have been constraints on flights out. This afternoon, the Prime Minister announced the initial 48-hour travel window will be extended by 24 hours until midnight on Friday for flights from Queenstown and sailings on the Crook Strait ferry. Tess Brunton has more.
When the lockdown began, holidaymakers were left scrambling to get home. Air New Zealand quickly put on extra flights, but because of the unique setup of landing in Queenstown, that became a pinch point. New Plymouth resident Janine Fenelon and her partner were holidaying in Wanaka when news of the lockdown and the 48-hour travel window came. She spent a few hours on hold with Air New Zealand, trying to figure out how they were getting home.
There were just no flights. We had flights booked for Sunday, but given that Sunday fell outside of that 48-hour period, and we were told that Air New Zealand would not be flying past midnight tonight, we made the call to just take whatever options we were offered. There were no options to fly out of Queenstown, so we were offered flights out of Invercargill or Christchurch.
Decision made and flights booked. They started their long trip home yesterday morning.
We hopped in the car at about 11:15 in the morning, and we drove through to Christchurch, got there at about 4:30. Our flight from Christchurch Airport was at 6, so that flight left on time. We arrived in Auckland, and then there was a delay in Auckland. Fortunately, they held up the planes for us so we could get onto the flight.
They arrived home last night about 11 p.m. Instead of a 4-hour trip, it took them 12. But Janine Fenelon says they're grateful for the help they received, the scenic drive past Aoraki Mount Cook, and to finally be safely at home. Palmerston North nurse Curry Highstead arrived in Queenstown a few days early to enjoy the sights ahead of a medical conference.
I arrived on Tuesday and did a few things, and then, we started having the announcements, and I knew at that point the conference would be cancelled. So I had spoke with my husband back in Palmy and said, look, I may just stay till Saturday, just keep my flight, not have to rearrange anything. I'll be fine down here. I had an Airbnb and I had food.
That all changed when news came through of the 48-hour travel window. Many phone refreshers and a few calls later, she managed to book a flight out of Queenstown, arriving home tired but relieved this afternoon. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern gave travellers a bit more breathing room this afternoon, extending the travel window for another 24 hours.
We will check in with them again because we have heard that there is high demand there. The issue, as you'll know, for Queenstown is because of the particular runway and airport situation there are certain pilots that have the ability to come in and out of that airport, and that does limit the number of flights they're able to bring in. But I know Air New Zealand are working very hard to lift their capacity.
Air New Zealand says it's confident there will be enough seats available to help those stranded in Queenstown to get home. The airline will operate 7 services from Queenstown, either to Auckland or Wellington tomorrow, with 700 additional seats. The Inter-Islander is adding more sailings tonight and tomorrow, asking anyone who needs to make a booking to visit their website or ring their call centre.
It's 13 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A mission to rescue Kiwis stuck in Afghanistan and those that helped New Zealand forces has finally taken off. A C-130 Hercules departed Auckland for the Middle East with up to 80 Defence Force personnel on board. They could deploy for up to a month as they join international efforts to evacuate citizens and at-risk Afghans following the Taliban takeover of the country. But as Kate Gregan reports, some are calling it a logistical nightmare.
The Air Force Hercules took off this morning, carrying maintenance staff, a medical team, and logistics and force protection personnel, amongst others. The Prime Minister admits this will be a challenging mission.
When we met this morning with officials, we were advised, though, that the situation on the ground is incredibly difficult. People are struggling to get to Kabul airport. We need to be prepared for how hard this mission will be and how difficult it will be to evacuate those who we are seeking to help. Our thoughts are with our Defence Force team as they enter on this deployment. I know that you will do what you can.
The Joint Forces Commander, Jim Gilmore, says personnel are making every effort to help get New Zealanders and other eligible evacuees out of Afghanistan safely. But it's not an easy task.
If the plan goes perfectly, or how we have imagined it in the planning, the aircraft will transit to operate from an airfield in the Middle Eastern region. We'll establish an evacuation handling capacity at that airfield and push forward some liaison officers into Kabul. Once we've identified the people that will travel, that's not going to be an easy task in itself, and to get them corralled, we will then call forward the aircraft into Kabul to pick them up and return them to the safe haven in the Middle Eastern region, and then they will be processed and then onward move towards New Zealand.
Aucklander Amin Bash is desperate to get his wife and toddler back from Kabul. He returned to New Zealand 3 months ago to organise his wife's entry to Aotearoa. His wife was granted a visa yesterday, and his son, who turns 2 next month, is a New Zealand citizen. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs decides who will be evacuated, and Amin says the ministry told him that his family needs to wait in a safe place, but be ready to leave with short notice. His concern, however, is how they will get to Kabul airport, as the Taliban have set up checkpoints.
They're hearing from people at every checkpoint. They're stopping people and asking where they're going. So they could take a taxi, but that is no guarantee whether they will be stopped by one of these checkpoints or not, or they will just ask and let go. Nobody knows.
Rear Admiral Jim Gilmore agrees that there's no simple solution.
There are very few, if any, partner nation militaries that are moving freely throughout Kabul or throughout Afghanistan. And what I'm observing, and I'm not saying this will be the case for everyone that we're covering, that there'll be an onus on people moving themselves to the airport when it is time for them to be evacuated.
Another potential difficulty is the mobile network. Amin Bash fears what will happen if the Taliban shut down the system.
They shut down the mobile networks. That means there's no communication whatsoever. There's no email, there's no internet, there's no broadband system. So all they have is their mobile, through their mobile data.
Professor Richard Jackson is the director of the National Centre for Peace and Conflict Studies. He says the whole mission is a logistical nightmare and is concerned for those who try and get out but fail to do so.
You know, if we go around identifying who the people are that we want to evacuate, but then they're not allowed to leave, then they'll be marked after, this whole thing is over, and that they'll be at the mercy of the Taliban.
The Defence Force is preparing to deploy for up to a month.
Regional areas of New South Wales will have their lockdowns extended by another week after the state recorded another 681 new cases. As the case numbers continue to climb, there are serious questions being raised about the effectiveness of the lockdown, with the Premier saying the worst is yet to come. The ABC's Catherine Gregory reports.
New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian arrives masked to her daily press conferences. When she removed it today, gloominess was etched into her face.
In the last 24 hours, we had 681 cases of community transmission, with 59 at least infectious in the community during that time. And we extend our sympathies and condolences to the family of a man in his 80s who died at St George Hospital in the last 24 hours.
It's not an unfair assessment to say the state's lockdown isn't working quickly enough. The answer given each day is that the settings are right and people just need to comply with the health orders. But public health experts say this is not good enough. Professor Mary Louise McLaws is an epidemiologist from the University of New South Wales and a member of the World Health Organisation's Emergency Response Program.
Stop coming to us every day and telling us we're not complying and we're not getting this right without you telling us what you're doing to combat this, without telling us where the majority of cases are being acquired, the direction of that acquisition, and the Department of Health's response to that.
Professor McLaws says government departments like New South Wales Health are inherently secretive with data, but that doesn't work in a pandemic. Transparent information is the only way to fight COVID.
We're not told the direction of transmission. For example, in childcare, when there's a cluster, a case, where did it come from? Did it come from the staff going to the child, staff going to the parent going to the staff, parent going to somebody else's child, or between children? And we can learn a lot from that.
She says knowledge about the vaccination status of workers or rapid antigen testing in workplaces like childcare centres would really help. And that raises another challenge in this outbreak, the delays in turning around the more official PCR tests. Professor McLaws says using the more rapid tests in workplaces is an additional public health measure that could reassure the public that the authorities are doing more to manage the outbreak.
The Auckland City Missioner says requests for help from its food bank doubled on the first day of Level 4 lockdown yesterday, and it's just as busy today. It's helping rough sleepers with food, housing and medical care, and the City Council's catering team has chipped in to help prepare food packs for the charity to distribute. Chen Liu reports.
Auckland City Missioner Helen Robinson says the charity's food bank has experienced a sharp increase in demand after the Level 4 COVID-19 lockdown was announced.
We certainly had a very busy day yesterday, so twice our normal on a Wednesday, and I understand it's very busy today too. So our experience of previous lockdowns is that as the lockdown continues, that demand for food increases.
She says 3 teams are also checking the streets to see if any rough sleepers need food, housing or medical help. Ms. Robinson says many are feeling bewildered and subdued about the lockdown. And the situation is concerning as many locations of interest are in the city centre, which is where rough sleepers are largely based.
I'm worried. We know that the physical and mental health of people who live on the street is significantly compromised. and that this community, if COVID would reach this community, it would be devastating.
Helen Robinson says the city mission can provide testing, vaccination and general medical care for those in need.
We will continue to provide services 365 days a year, even in the level 4 lockdown, and that we can only do that because of the generosity of Auckland. So we thank Auckland for their support.
Auckland Council's catering services team is helping cooking and preparing meal packs each day during the lockdown for the city mission, as the charity's kitchen can't operate during level 4. The council's general manager of corporate support services, Rob Irvine, says there is a variety of food in the pack.
Every day we prepare around 250 meals, and that really includes some really great stuff such as sandwiches and muffins, as well as some healthy options such as a bowl of salad and fruit.
He says staff members are enjoying the work.
Our staff love it. You know, they feel that they can really contribute. Obviously, with alert level 4, most of our staff will be working remotely at home, so they feel this is a great opportunity for them to come in and really help and, support a great cause.
Meanwhile, the coordinator at charity Auckland Action Against Poverty, Brooke Powell-Stanley, says some people can't get grocery, pay bills, access the internet or give kids device for online learning.
We've been calling for benefits to be increased to livable incomes for a very long time now, and we're also asking for work and income to administer a high trust model, the same model that they used when administering the COVID income relief payment last year and the wage subsidy.
City Commissioner Helen Robinson says several government agencies are supporting the charity. The Silver Ferns captain, Amelia Ignacio, has signed with the Magic in a major off-season signing. Pulse fans were shocked earlier this week when the franchise announced her departure after 6 seasons, including 2 back-to-back titles. Ignacio is due to give birth to her second child later this year and told Bridget Tunnicliffe that was a big factor in her decision.
That was the main part of it, and where I could go, where I could feel like everything that I bring was valued and I could bring it to the table and I would be able to be welcomed like that.
I think Noeline Toto once described the players' signing period as a bit of a meat market. Contract negotiations can't be an enjoyable experience. Did you?
Hey, yeah, you're right.
Did you initially want to return to the Pulse next year? Was it your first sort of thought was to return to the Pulse?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were really unsure how next year was gonna look with a new baby. All we knew, like 100%, what we knew was that one, I wanted to be playing netball, and that I needed to be somewhere where I felt the most supported to return back on court. So that's not just me as an athlete, like that's me as a mum and for our family as well too. So it was looking for where I could get that level of support and feel like it was really welcomed. I mean, Pulse is, I haven't actually played at any other New Zealand franchise. I've only ever been here, so a move hadn't been on our thoughts early on. But when I really started to weigh up my values and what I needed, we thought we needed to start looking.
A lot of fans were disappointed with the way the Pulse announced things earlier this week. You barely got a mention in the press release. They have said they wanted to wait until your next move was announced, but I'm still confused why I couldn't have thanked your service to the franchise in that first release. How do you feel about the way your departure was handled?
Yeah, well, I guess, I have been here, like you said, for I think it's 6 seasons, isn't it? I mean, I've almost lost track of it being 6 seasons, but I think it's a really timely reminder for anybody as an athlete that being a professional athlete is a job, and I think sometimes we forget that there are people behind the athletes as well too, and that sometimes this is the nature. I mean, like you said before, Knowles has referred to this time of the year as the meat market, which is contracting time. And that's the time when we see it turn into a business. So that's just a timely reminder to not invest every single thing that I am into this time of the year.
Silver Ferns captain Amelia Ignacio speaking to sports reporter Bridget Tunnicliffe. Now here's one from the It's Never Too Late file. A 92-year-old woman has had her painting displayed in a Nelson gallery for the first time. Our reporter Kirsty Frame caught up with her.
Nancy Maurice is a firm believer in the old adage that it's never too late to try something new. Last week, she exhibited her art for the very first time at Nelson's annual How Great Thou Art exhibition. She's been painting her whole life, picking up paintbrushes after encouragement from her teacher in high school many years ago. She says her best work is finely hand-painted china, but her love for oil painting came after she began to struggle with her eyesight.
I used to paint on china, which I've got displayed all around the place. It requires very, very fine work on the plates. And I thought, oh gosh, I've had this, so I took up the oil painting.
Now, Nancy Maurice's home is filled with moody landscape canvases of Moana across the Motu, which she paints from memory. It was friends at her local art group who encouraged her to submit for the upcoming exhibition, and she says the hardest part was deciding which paintings to select for display.
I have it all piled up, up in a bedroom, and I had to bring it all out, and they decided which would be good ones to display, and they sorted it all out for me.
She says to see her work displayed among other artists at the exhibition last week was a very special moment. Nancy Maurice isn't slowing down on the canvas anytime soon, saying it continues to elevate her spirits. She says despite a person's age, no one should give up on what sparks joy.
I think it's wonderful to have an interest as you get older. Then you do, as I say, have some interests in life that instead of just sitting around getting old. I don't feel as if I've got to the stage at 92 to give up painting or just keep going.
And with an attitude like Nancy's, there's more where that came from.
And let's get to some of your feedback before we head off. This is on the wait for COVID tests. Helen says, it beggars belief, 9 hours in a queue. Why can't the car occupants be triaged with symptoms and temperature checks and saliva tests? If positive, top of the queue, others sent home. And a nurse has got in touch to say all those poor people waiting in testing lines can go to their local GP. And there are several other places who will do a COVID test, including White Crosses. Feel very sorry for them. I'm a nurse who is redeployed each lockdown into the pop-up testing stations. We can only go so fast, they say. Another person says, good doctor at the Greyland Community Centre is a good place to go for a COVID test. You can call ahead and be seen almost straight away. Another person says their GP doesn't do COVID tests, so they went to the Balmoral testing station. They did that at 12:30 today. They waited until 3:15 and then they were told there were no more testing kits at Balmoral and St Luke's. Tried to ring Healthline but couldn't get through at all. That is from Hamish. So here's a bit of advice. Auckland Regional Public Health Service website. They list the 6 community testing stations with the addresses and hours. They're on that website. There are also 6 pop-up testing stations, all listed there with their addresses and times. So, and we've just had a press release saying an additional pop-up will be operating from tomorrow. So 13 in total. Have a look online. Choose the one that's closest to you. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi popo from 5 o'clock tomorrow on First Up, a New Zealand woman stranded in Kabul who is desperate to get on that Mercy flight out of there.
And I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night. I was standing by there for the 6:30 news headlines, but maybe the line between Auckland and Wellington has gone kaput again. So I thought I'd just crack on with what's coming up in the next half hour. By the way, coming up after 7 when Nights begins officially is an interview with Emily Kendall. She's a PhD student in physics. It's our sci-fi, sci-fact, our intersection of science fiction and reality. And tonight it's the science behind Ghostbusters, not the supernatural, not even the supernatural. Not the ghost stuff, but the proton beams that the Ghostbusters use to catch the ghosts with. Whether there's any possible science behind those backpacks and those things that look like fire hoses which fire out electric lightning or something like that, and which seem to be very difficult to control. That's coming up in the first hour of Nights. In this half hour, later on, we've got an interview which has been getting a lot of clicks on the website. It's from Sunday Morning with Jim Mora. He spoke to Rebecca Campbell about her attempts, having found a really good career, to find a bloke. But first off, the detail. And once again, it's back on the case of the super hot housing market.
Every day, stories like this.
New data out today shows asking prices for houses have doubled in some areas in the past 10 years.
The Auckland property boom has basically started again. It started a little bit early. That'll carry on not just through 2021, but for the next 7, 8, 9, 10 years.
It's not just Auckland seeing enormous growth. The regions are red hot too.
If you're a homeowner in the Bay of Plenty, get out the champagne. Asking prices in Kawerau have surged 132% in the past decade.
You can just see the wide gulf that we're starting to see. More importantly, as those house prices continue to rise at such a fast clip compared to incomes, it means that everyone's on such a back foot that it takes longer and longer to get into a house.
You know, for far too long, it's been this narrative of, particularly for my generation, that if we stop buying flat white, stop getting avocado on toast, all of a sudden, eventually, further down the track, we'll be able to get on the housing ladder.
It's going crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Housing used to be part of the great Kiwi dream. That dream is very quickly slipping away.
How did we get here, and is it too late to turn it around? I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail...
Is it so stuck now? Is it so embedded? Is it so cemented into the very financial and economic structures of the country that we can't get our way out of it? That's what I'm scared about. I'm scared that it's so baked in that you can't undo it. And that's a terrifying thought.
Journalist Rebecca McPhee has been looking at New Zealand's path to a housing crisis in a feature for North and South magazine. After all, there was a time when things seemed just as bad, if not worse.
We hadn't enough of any sort of house, even the old uncomfortable ones. We had people crowded up in old out-of-date houses in busy streets. A nation's prosperity isn't measured in exports and show and false fronts. It's in the way people live and in how much sun they get, where the kids grow up and in how the sanitation works.
This was in the middle of the Great Depression.
40,000 families living in houses that should have been pulled down, living in rooms and flats, wherever they could find a roof over their heads. Sometimes several families in one house. 40,000 families in 1935.
And now, well, Habitat for Humanity believes 300,000 families are living in unacceptable housing conditions as a result of unaffordable homes, overcrowding and poor housing stock. The issue is dominating the news cycle, and McPhee wanted to put it into an historical context.
Every day you get up and there's stories about housing. I mean, today there's probably, I've probably read 10 this morning. But phenomena like this don't arise rapidly. There are deep roots almost always with social change, social and economic change. And so really it was a case of sort of going back and looking for what that might be. And that was the sort of framing for how we wanted to approach this story, rather than, what happened last week, what might happen next week, what the Reserve Bank's going to do tomorrow. All of that obviously is clearly as part of the story, but housing is really an incredibly complex ecosystem that it touches all aspects of society. Because it's a primal human need, people need shelter. And that was really our kind of starting point for thinking about how are we going to approach this story. The classic beginning point is probably 1937, with the beginning of the Michael Joseph Savage government's State House building program, and there's that famous photo where he's carrying the dining table through the front door of Fife Crescent in Miramar.
Everybody is happy. The Prime Minister, Mr. Nash, Mr. Semple and Mr. Lee take their coats off and help to carry in the furniture. Truly a red letter day for home seekers.
And then it goes along, gets through the war years, and by 1949, a lot of people talk about that being an election that was in part fought on the idea that would housing policy be about the mass provision of state-owned rentals, if you like, or would it be this kind of shift towards mass home ownership? And the latter philosophy prevailed in a way, really. National won that election. And that really became I think, the agreed kind of philosophy. So we moved through those subsequent decades with this.
These houses are the evidence of how well off we are. They're an important part of our standard of living. It's a standard that's constantly being raised.
What's often referred to as the post-war consensus, and what remains a kind of a permanent feature through those decades is, really very hands-on, very highly involved state. So both the building of state housing that continued to go on until we get to by 1990, which is kind of the break point for all of this, 1991, there are 70,000 state houses by then, which is, more than Kāinga Ora owns now. The other thing that emerges through those post-war decades is the development of state advances, the State Advances Corporation, which issued cheap loans for first home buyers. So a lot of just very ordinary working families, not people with a lot of money, were able to take out a 3% loan with the state advances to purchase their first home, just as was happening in farming. I mean, I come from a family where my father had a state advances loan as a returned serviceman to buy a farm. But this was also happening in the provision of housing as well. Another really big piece of this multi-pronged, very sophisticated system for the development of a high-functioning housing ecosystem was the ability to capitalise the family benefit from the late 50s. So the family benefit, which is long gone now, but was a universal benefit that was paid to every dependent child. So capitalising that meant that you could apply to effectively bring forward, capitalise the value of what that benefit was going to be for your family.
Yeah, I mean, my parents did that to build our extension on our house to fit all
there you go.
And you could,
Right. Well, in my story, I talked to Mark Goshi, who's been many things in a very long and varied career, but currently is the chairman of Kāinga Ora. But his own story, in a way, is this historical map of our collective story in housing, because his dad came from Samoa, his mum was from South Auckland, left school at 15. They had 7 children, and they had a State Advances Corporation loan for a house in Papatoetoe. They capitalised the family benefit to build the extra room on the house. It's a quintessential, in some ways, New Zealand story. And it was not without problems, because you still had this huge, there are big ethnic divides. The position of Māori was never as privileged as Pākehā. The situation for Pacifica was never as beneficial as it was for Pākehā. But the percentage of home ownership that was achieved across the board was just generally higher. And it is, since the 90s, subsequently just kind of fallen away.
I mean, even if you're on a good whack these days and you're young, some kids now it's not even in their ballpark, is it?
Yeah. And this is the sort of deep thinking that has changed, is young people coming up into the workforce who just can't contemplate how they would ever assemble the deposit to get a mortgage to buy a house.
So we've gone from an expectation in our parents and sort of grandparents, if you like, time, that one day we will own a home, to an expectation that how on earth am I ever going to own a home? And that's happened in 2 generations?
1 generation, I would say. I think it's happened in 1 generation.
So what was the turning point?
I guess the proposition for my story in North and South is that turning point is 1991. I guess my evidence for that being the break point is that I was able to look at the final report of the National Housing Commission, which was part of that deep kind of complex ecosystem that we talked about before, with state advances loans, capitalising the family benefit, lots of state house construction and so on. There was this other thing also called the National Housing Commission, which was an advisor to government. It produced a 5-yearly report. It was completely independent, and it would kind of survey the situation for how New Zealand was doing at housing its people, how it was providing for the most primal need of the population to have shelter. Let's not forget that that's what housing is. It is safe shelter. So we get this final report of the National Housing Commission in 1988, because after that it's abolished, and it talks about what the situation is. There are a lot of stresses. It talks about lengthening queues for state housing. It's not an ecosystem that's without problems. There are a lot of pressures building. But there's a couple of incredibly interesting observations in it, where it says New Zealand is very fortunate still, however, to not have the problems of other countries such as Europe or America, where there are people living on the street, handbag people it calls them, where people are turned away from emergency shelters because the need is so great they simply can't be accommodated. And the commissioners comment that, thankfully New Zealand's abhorrence of poverty is such that, this situation wouldn't be allowed to occur here. Now, that's 1988.
Rebecca, was there some kind of international impetus to change this? What was the feeling in the country in the early 90s that made us swerve in the direction of, I guess, a harsher life for the poor? Benefit cuts, market rates, that kind of Gordon Gekko kind of philosophy. What happened?
I think you can't really disentangle it from the whole pro-market, very, radical pro-market shift that New Zealand underwent in the 80s, obviously beginning with the 1984 Labour government. But the move of that thinking into the social sphere, particularly housing, was resisted by, I guess, defenders, if you like, of the role of the state in the provision of core social services, including Helen Clark, who became the housing minister in the second term of that fourth Labour government. And there was a lot of pressure coming on from Treasury. Treasury actually had this idea that the state shouldn't be providing actual houses. It should just be providing a voucher to help people who are poor to have a house. And that way you would develop what's called a tenure-neutral approach, where people would have their voucher, they'd go out into the market, and they might enable them to rent a house from a private landlord, or they might rent from the state, perhaps. So the idea of the state having a particular role in the provision of housing is sort of under attack and it's entirely ideological. I mean, there's no economic basis for this. It's a thoroughly ideological position.
It's like a hands-off government kind of situation, where the government should not be providing things that the market can provide, and
that's right,
make a profit for themselves and contribute to the wealth of the country, actually. Yeah.
So it's exactly the same conversation that's going on through every other aspect of the economy through those years, including, of course, the labour market, which also